So my name is Wright, and I'm here in the capacity, technically, as an associate of what's called the Center for Internet and Society, which is one of a number of Center for Internet and Societies around the world. This one happens to be in Bangalore, and focuses mostly on issues related to the Indian context, but also related more broadly to the global south. Chris has been very kind in allowing me to stretch the definition of IP activism today. Because what I'm going to talk about, and hopefully what we'll talk about, is not so much IP as it is about ideas more broadly of innovation, of activism, of how to empower people with information. So I'll talk maybe just for 5-10 minutes, and hopefully we can get a conversation going since it's a small group. But maybe before I do that, could I just get a sense of where you guys are from so I know what your interests are, like really quickly? Start here.
I'm interested in the States.
Okay.
I do IP work for IBM.
Internet society.
IP antitrust telecom.
I do policy work for Google.
Yep.
IP access to medicines.
And I'm a student at Columbia University. I've worked this summer. Cliches.
There's more to you than that, surely.
I do online learning at the school.
Right.
I'm a third-year student, so we're doing work on the Innovate, Activate stuff, and more interested in the human rights aspect.
Right. And
I'm a second-year student here. I'm a student research fellow at the Institute.
great. So basically, I spent the summer in India working at the center, and what I spent most of my time doing was researching and thinking about and writing a report on the idea of open government data in India. Thinking about what does data mean in an Indian context, what can data mean, what is the function of data, what can be its function. Thinking primarily about issues of how to encourage greater transparency, greater accountability at all levels of government by involving people both from civil society, from government, individual civic hackers, sort of a national project to create a sort of repository of open government data like we have in the US with something like data.gov. So that's the very rough background. So in the process of working on this report, which is done under the auspices of something called the Transparency and Accountability Initiative, which is a donor consortium based out of London. That has also been funding a variety of studies on IP rights and right to information and open data. I traveled around India and talked to people, again, in government, civil society, commercial actors, individual hackers, and right to information activists to try to think about and get a sense of these questions. What is open data in India, in the US? Is it different? Are the functions different? And thinking about sort of, what are the best ways to conceptualize this? Is it transparency? Is it accountability? Is it something more closer to innovation, which I think is what you get in the US context or in the UK context? And what emerges, I think, when you talk to people across all sectors of Indian society, is that if open data is going to mean something in India, what it's going to mean is related to the empowerment of society at a very basic level. I guess I'll talk briefly. There is a very robust right to information movement in India that sprung up, say, around the year 2000, and culminated in 2005 in the passage of a National Right to Information Act. What this act does is basically empower individuals to make requests to the government, basically the same as a FOIA, to get information that they want. They can get really any information that they request as long as they're specific enough in their petition. And so the Right to Information Act has basically enabled people to get information about, say, benefits that they're supposed to be getting but are not getting, information about sort of broader government schemes, as well as just sort of providing an eye into the workings of the Indian bureaucracy, which, as you can imagine, is just crazy out there in terms of its structure. So the RTI Act has been fairly successful, again, in empowering people on an individual level. Maybe about 2 months ago, there was an article in the New York Times about how one woman in particular was able to finally get the benefits that she had been denied for a fairly large amount of time, just as a result of making a request. Because once you make a request, someone has to tell you why you're not getting the benefits, and eventually they have to provide them to you. So again, what emerges in conversations with the government and other people is that the function of open data in India should be to empower people at a collective level in the same way that the RTI Act does at an individual level. So the idea is that as the RTI Act is sort of oriented towards answering individual queries, open data should be oriented towards addressing larger societal issues. So the problems that sort of emerge when you look at this is, what kind of data can actually be used to address societal problems? At what level do you want to focus your data practices and your dissemination of data? And probably most importantly, how do you actually provide access to this data to the people who can use it to help themselves? So what the Indian government has done, and I'm almost done with my spiel, I promise. What the Indian government has done is they have proposed the creation of what they're calling a public information infrastructure. And the idea that is sort of like data.gov on steroids. And you should read about this if you get a chance because it's really interesting. But what they want to do is establish a national knowledge network connecting institutions of learning and government all across society, which is accessible through what they call common service centers, or CSCs, in about 60,000 villages all across India. The idea is that these service centers will consolidate government services, some commercial services, such as wholesale and retail purchasing, all in one place for the benefits of people to actually get information. So the question is, how do you, in a society like India where there are any number of languages spoken in any place, how do you actually make these centers work in such a way that you deliver information to the people who need it? And this is currently what the government is trying to figure out. So I realize that it's a very broad overview, and you may have some questions because I want to get to a conversation. But based on what I said, does anyone have any questions so far? No? Right. So as part of this project, actually, we're working with Beth Novak, who Chris has done a lot of work with, and who's the Deputy Chief Technology Officer for the US, I believe. And we've done some work with the Web Foundation as well, and sort of looking at what factors are important in promoting the idea of open government data in countries like India, like Brazil, throughout the global south. And Beth sent an email in reply to a Web Foundation proposal the other day that I thought was extremely good in articulating some concerns over open data. And maybe we can start a conversation a little bit about this by, the first is what is open data? When I say open data, what am I talking about? Am I making sense to you? And how would you make sense of this idea to others? So does anyone throw something out just so I can get a sense of
machine readable.
Okay. Anybody else?
Information that is public knowledge.
Mm-hmm. We're going to get an unconference going, right? So we've got machine readable, we've got public knowledge. You notice I didn't define open data when I started talking. I just started talking about open data. So I want to know, what does that make you think of when I say open data? Or does it just leave you with sort of a blank, vacant spot? Okay.
Searchable.
Right.
I think of government budgets.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So do we think about, and this is important, I think, do we think about government data, or do we think about, say, commercial data, like export-import data?
That to me was the most interesting when you talked about wholesale, retail. Could you expand on that?
That's just one of a number of recommendations. But the idea is that, in Indian society, especially in the rural areas, which I think 60% of India currently still lives in villages. So when you're sort of looking at a model of Indian life, most people, or not most, but a great number of people are engaged in agricultural activities. So one of the things that these centers can do is to plug farmers into supply networks. That's probably the biggest thing, but also talking about wholesale. Just providing a sort of one-stop place for procurement of goods and services by commercial actors throughout the district. Does that help you there?
Yeah, I just wonder about, the sort of commercial proprietariness of, how it can make it inclusive or...
Right. No, it's a good question. One of the tensions, I think, in these things is to what extent are you sort of enabling, say, the commercial side, and to what extent are you providing services specifically from the government oriented towards, individuals and groups?
Creating, I know how it is in India, and you're creating, barriers. All right, to get listed in the official database, you've got to go through some bureaucracy before you'll get listed in the CSC. You've got to go to here to get your form to get filled out.
Right.
And, it's how it, and so that has the effect of actually excluding players from, because
right.
Who defines what data gets included within the system.
Right. No, definitely, I think. So I want to get back to the idea of what is open data and what does it mean to us. I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, maybe.
Chris is here. We can.
Yes.
Well, he's watching the time.
Oh, no.
Just for the recording.
So I just
Clip it out here.
got it.
Thank you.
So we talked about what open data is. So we have interoperability, we have machine readability. We think about things like budgets, like government data, maybe to some extent like commercial data. And what I want to get further is when I say open data, what not only do you think it means, but what to you is the function of that when you're talking about it? Anyone?
Increased, I was thinking agricultural efficiency.
Right.
Just knowledge to more efficient means by which to do things.
So are you guys all familiar with data.gov? Okay.
No, they just had an initiative here, the Big Apps
Right.
thing in New York. They released certain sets of data, and they've had hearings, 2 hearings at the City Council. Gail Brewer put up, she's very active,
Right.
pushing a wider range of.
So the idea of data.gov is to provide basically a central repository of government-produced information or data sets, more specifically, on just a wide variety of issues. So those of you with laptops, can take a quick look at it if you want. The essential idea is providing very large data sets which citizens, civil society, commercial society can then use to innovate upon, to inform their business decisions, to sort of enable an ongoing examination of government processes. So that, sort of to me, is the idea behind data.gov, with a large focus not only on transparency and accountability, but on the idea of innovation. But again, so I want to sort of get to the heart of this. When I say open data, what are the functions of that in your mind?
I see it as a way for the public to understand what their rights are and understand and it's a tool to hold their government accountable for what is not happening.
I would say more is, so that people can make innovative applications to find new uses for that data.
And then
Yeah, it was along the same lines as what you were saying. Just to make government a little bit, well, not government, society, less of a black box. We'll open it up and see the gears spinning around.
Right. So, so basically we've sort of come around to the 3 catchwords maybe, which are transparency, accountability, and innovation. And so, one question is what kinds of data should be available in the U.S. to encourage these 3 things? When you mentioned budget data, certainly that's a big one. But beyond that, sort of in the U.S. context, what would you say are the kinds of data that could empower organizations and individuals to focus on these things?
Well, definitely it's budget data as it comes to policy. And we have, there's been an example of the MTA's budget that was put on, put online, created a lot of debate last year.
Right.
think crime statistics
Right.
or health information, those might be areas where people feel very personally affected.
So crime statistics in the U.S. is actually very interesting. There is, I'm not sure if this has been passed, but in the past week, there was a provision put into a spending bill enabling local police departments, I believe it was either local or state police departments, I believe it was local police departments, to spend a certain amount of money on a particular crime statistics website. And the problem with this is that the company that runs the program has a provision in their contract stating that once information is given to them, and they turn it around and publish in a database, it's then copyright protected. And so, obviously, this is not something you want to encourage, at the level of, telling people what they can spend.
Data by its innate nature is not copyrightable, right?
Right.
But it's one wonders if one couldn't make some kind of share-alike license that
Well,
would
it's more an
insist
issue in this
that
case of
stuff based on that data has to be.
Right. It's not the underlying data so much as the presentation of the data. So once they amalgamate it, they consider it their original creation. Whether or not that can pass is questionable, but still, it's just interesting. But I want to keep moving forward. So when we think about data, I mean, do you think, does open data make sense at a national level, at a state level, at a municipal level? Like, where would it be most
Neighborhood
effective? Right, neighborhood level. So in the context of the U.S. again.
Yes.
Right. At all of these at the same time, you think?
Yes.
Right. So, one of the things in India that's a concern, and I think this is true throughout the developing world in terms of open data, is when you talk about open data in these contexts, you're talking about...
Except for privacy concerns.
Right. So that's a whole other ballgame. But the issue certainly is, how do you actually empower people to use this information? In India, civil society is, at least in terms of issues of information technology, extremely lacking. There is not that much coordination between the various NGOs who actually are working in the space of ICT practices. And outside of those, there's just very little use of technology for purposes in civil society. And so one of the questions is, say you open up India's data. Who in society is actually going to be able to make use of this in any real sense? I asked, what does open data mean? And you said machine readable, interoperability, these sorts of things. So open data in the context of India, often what you find is when you talk to people in the government, open data means a scanned PDF that's probably lopsided, certainly not OCRable, and barely readable. This is what open data means. And on some level, I mean, there's some truth to that. When you look at sort of the history of information sharing practice in India, sort of a lopsided scanned PDF with a signature covering some important provision is actually not that bad. So the question is sort of, where do you, I guess, draw the line or set the line, or find a way to bring together, say, what you might think of as Western data practices, which rely on very robust data sets that are easily manipulatable, machine readable, versus an idea of open data in India that basically just addresses putting information online where it's available. So yeah, I guess that's another question.
Well, it's a slope. You take the low-hanging fruit first, and then you kind of work, as to what you have the capacity for. What there's been some interesting initiatives here is, in America is to take places which are deprived of technology, set up community technology centers, and then employ people in scanning and then interpreting and stuff and putting it into data as to a way of promoting data literacy and jobs and work.
Right. So the reason that I talk about the U.S. and I'm asking questions about that is that I want to think, and I'm trying to think currently, as I've expressed too many times, about the differences between open data regimes in India, places like India, versus those in the U.S. I was talking with the executive director of our organization, who was supposed to appear via Skype today, but unfortunately was stuck in Paris. So is not doing that, and then you get me instead. And one of the things that you encounter when you think about open data and activism is what he calls a lot of middle-class activism. So, there's the idea in the US, for example, of, say, like Open 311. Are you guys familiar with this? Right, so a protocol enabling 3-in-1 services online, developed, I think, by the government of San Francisco. So, when you think about open data, you might think about things like pothole management or, street light reporting. And there's a sense in which I think this idea of, using data to sort of promote civic sustainability has crossed over to India. So you have organizations, one's called Kirti.
Spell what?
KIIRTI. That does a lot of things like sort of connecting citizens to their municipal governments for purposes of reporting things like potholes, like sewage problems, like street lights not working. And the question is this stuff important in a country that has such high poverty levels? Is this what we should be using technology and the capacity of various civil society organizations to do?
There's an example in Kenya called the budget tracking tool, and they're doing kind of what you're talking about, but not related to streetlights. Instead, constituents are able to collect or receive data from this online source to their mobile phone to find out how much money was put into the budget for that community to build a school, for example. Very basic infrastructure stuff.
Right.
And those constituents then can also add data back to this budget tracking tool to say whether or not that school is being built, to say whether windows have been put on, a roof has been put on, books, things like that. So I don't think it just has to be streetlights. I think it can be like really important information.
I guess the question is when you talk to people, even really at the highest levels of the Indian government, and in fact, if you read the proposal for, again, what I've called the public information infrastructure, which you can find easily online, it's very explicit in saying that in India, the people behind the open data policy understand it to be a tool of radically democratizing society. So, this is sort of what I want to think about is when you say data is going to radically democratize society, first of all, what does that mean? Second of all, what kinds of data can possibly do this? And third, once you settle these questions, how do you enable people to achieve this radical democratization? Is this just sort of a phrase, or is it going to be achieved through things like providing budget data to people, providing pothole management services, or is it going to be something much stronger and more robust? And what does that mean? And
one Wednesday last year, Joshua Breitbart made a speech where he works with a sort of educating people, in underserved communities, and he said that policy is the new literacy.
Right. Well, the problem in India, first of all, is, yes, well, literacy is one problem, but there are multiple kinds of literacy. There's computer literacy. There's, say, technology literacy when you think about things like using mobile phones. And then there's, basic access to these tools in the first place. You mentioned mobile phones, and often when you talk to, especially the government in India, and you say open data, well, what that means to them is that you enable people to access certain kinds of data via their mobile phones, right? The problem with mobile phones in India, first of all, is just to give you one example. The Maharashtra, which is the state in which Mumbai is located, the Maharashtra Department of Agriculture provides certain kinds of data or information to farmers over their mobile phones. This could be issues like, rain levels, pest extermination information, basic climate issues. And a huge problem they encounter is, this being Maharashtra, not everyone speaks English, and in fact, most people speak Marathi. And most people have old or very basic cell phones that can't actually render the Marathi script. And so you're sending messages in English to people to enable them to do things with their farms, and they're not actually able to access the information that you're so kindly giving. Obviously, the department recognizes this is a problem, but there's not so much they can do. So, you know, when you talk about phones, you have issues, first of all, just like that, with basic technical capabilities, and then you have issues of actually having people use the phones. You know, often you hear these examples in the third world or developing worlds of people using their phones to access information. And one of the questions is that actually true? You know, are that many people actually making use of this? You know, statistics may say one thing, anecdotal evidence another, but I'm not sure that there's anything to back it up. But
I'd say it's, you know, it's early days yet, and that, you know, as phones move increasingly to open source operating systems, that you know, the system should be developed.
Right. Certainly, there's greater support by, say, Ubuntu than by Microsoft for Indian scripts. That relates to phones, but. So again, getting back to this question, I mean, what do you guys think about the idea of data as a radically democratizing tool? You know, as a source of activist power. You know, does it make sense, say, in America? Does it make sense, do you think, in the developing world?
Okay, so I guess more analog, I guess anecdotes. South Africa, they would, especially during the new constitution period, 1990-94, what would happen is they would post just headlines all over the place. You get like one-page big things like reading the back of somebody's new post. And now that's kind of going to show up everywhere because nobody could access this information otherwise. So even though it's just like a little blurb, it would show up in, you know, some headlines would be in English or Afrikaans. And this was what allowed everybody to get on the same page.
Right.
Turning the country into democracy.
Right.
And that's what mobilized, that's what enabled the Constitution. That's what everybody rallied around and done and stuff. Right.
Right. I mean, I guess, you know, one of the questions is, if data can be radically democratizing, can it be that in the U.S.? You know, does that sort of idea make sense in our political context? You know, I was talking with someone the other day, and you know, you look at the country's political climate, and it's not that great. You know, the tone is very harsh, and there's a lot of debate over, you know, what's been done, what certain policies mean, what are the effects. And you know, the question is, can you say utilize something like data.gov to increase awareness of the way things actually are? You know, can you increasingly mobilize the use of information by activists, by civil society, by people to not only, I guess, contribute to the debate, but sort of to frame various policy debates as well. And in so doing, can that have, you know, maybe what you would call a democratizing effect on the tone? Does anyone throw stuff out? Any comments?
I've actually been working with, in the past, an organization tried to go help provide more information. Well, it was getting immigration statistics and data to try to reframe the immigration policy in Canada to, you know, refute, say, like the governing party's policies, like saying there's an overabundance of certain classes of workers coming in, and that wasn't actually true. So it can be very helpful in making sure that the government is transparent,
right?
Even in you know, more developed nations.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
I mean, I think there's an interesting question, I guess, in comparing. I mean, I don't know enough about sort of the state of local media in India and whether there's a robust local media sort of institution that. But certainly in developed countries, there's a decline of local media, local reporting, especially particularly in North America. And I guess an interesting question is, you know, can open data, can crowdsource things like Open 311, things like that, can these in some sense replace or in this transition period supplement efforts to have kind of local information that gets disseminated? Because in the old days, you'd have a reporter for a local newspaper who'd go out and collect a lot of this information about, you know, this lake is polluted and kind of disseminate that. And now you really don't have that. You don't have that kind of distribution of information to the public and to get it somewhere.
Yeah, the question there is how you put this stuff that the reporter once wrote into data. Like you go to a school board meeting and attend and figure out what people are saying, but there's a lot more. There isn't much data produced out of the school board meeting, but there's a lot of structure that goes on. So how you capture that data is a pretty huge challenge, right? They're trying to replace.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think we have like a minute left, but did you?
Oh, yeah, I was just, I mean, I think that can data have a democratizing effect? Yes and no. I mean, sometimes it will and sometimes it won't, but I think that's sort of the point is that you're going to get a lot of failures, but the successes that you get are going to be unexpected and something you wouldn't otherwise have. The thing I was going to say about obstacles, taking these principles and trying to translate them into developing or emerging economy. I'm reminded of the barriers that people faced when they were talking about providing antiretrovirals in very poor countries.
Right.
There were a lot of people who said, no, you can't even, let's not even try to focus on providing drugs to people because they don't have clean water to take them with, they don't have regular access to health facilities that can ensure that they take them on the schedule, and so the Partners in Health is they said, well, let's just do it. Let's operate on multiple fronts. Yes, there's significant problems in these other areas too, but let's go and try to cover all fronts. It's not like we don't have to choose necessarily. And in some ways, by taking the initiative, we may open up opportunities for people to say, oh, this is a great thing. Let's start to work on it. And the other thing is mobile phones. I mean, so there is a lack of, I mean, in many parts of the world, like a lack of access and a lack of technological literacy, a lack of literacy. But mobile phones are increasingly available to people in very remote places, and a lot of people are focusing on that. So I see a lot of potential, and even just establishing a standard or a presumption that data should be open. I think even if you could at least get that kind of in place, right, rather than letting it go the other way. I think the possibilities will open themselves up in the future.
I think so. So I think what the issues come down to, if you could sort of isolate a few things, is first of all you have to encourage and sort of foster a sense of openness in terms of culture. In India, certainly this has never been the case, but slowly with the passage of the RTI Act and sort of increasing awareness of the availability of knowledge, this is changing, and I think it will continue to change, and that you will see much more robust information practices and data availability from the Indian government in the future. So the question is, I guess, how do you develop standards to assist in the dissemination of this information? How do you make it, platform agnostic, say, so that people can access it on their phones, via web interfaces, maybe even in print at a village data center where people are uncomfortable using a computer. And then maybe most importantly, how do you enable or begin to enable civil society to make use of this data to affect political change? How do you enable certain organizations, maybe at a local level, to look at district and village level municipal data to begin to make decisions at a local level, which historically has not really been the case in India, which is sort of a very top-down kind of place, where a bureaucrat in New Delhi makes a decision that sort of determines the ways of life for people in the village, thousands of miles away. So these are the basic questions. I apologize for what is essentially a superficial gloss over some interesting complex issues, but I hope that it provides you at least a framework to think about these kinds of things. And to think about, what does what does activism mean? What does innovation mean in the context of looking at data both in another way? And I'm very sorry that you didn't get to experience Sunil Abraham, who is the executive director of the Center for Internet Society, who is much more handsome and funnier than I am. If you get a chance, you should look him up online because he's well worth listening to. So thank you.